Hydraulics play a major role in the operation of agricultural implements. The Case Draft-o-Matic system aids the farmer in the efficient operation of the tractor and implement. The Draft-o-Matic's contribution simply isn't realized until you hear the customer complaint, the Draft-o-Matic doesn't work. To ensure minimum customer downtime, knowledge in troubleshooting the Draft-o-Matic system is required. So let's break our system down into the 5 most common areas of customer complaints. And then for each of these 5 areas, you'll see how to isolate a particular problem and where to obtain detailed repair instructions. Now, the first area of customer complaint is the Draft-o-Matic raises and lowers the hitch arms but doesn't sense enough. The next is the hitch arms come all the way up and won't cancel. Another is the hitch arms hiccup when the engine is running or leak down when the engine isn't running. Still another is the hitch arms won't raise at all. And the last area of customer complaint is the hitch arms won't lower. Now let's take a closer look at each of these 5 situations. The Draft-o-Matic system doesn't sense enough. Well, remember, the hitch arms will raise and lower. The problem is the draft sensing does not work. In this case, the implement load will not be sensed, and there will be no transfer of weight to the rear wheels. The result will be either a loss of traction, or the engine will lug down if the tractor has been overweighted. Before you can determine where your problem lies, there are some things that you and your customer must check to be sure the Draft-o-Matic can work the way it was designed to. First, does the operator know how to properly operate the system? Videotape VTR 4001 Draft-o-Matic operation explains proper operation. Is the tire pressure correct? Are the hitch arms set to the right height? Is the tractor weighted properly? All of these are explained in VTR 4001. According to VTR 4001, the rear wheels are properly weighted for Draft-o-Matic field operation when they have A, no slip, B, 3 to 5% slip, C, 8 to 12% slip. Write down your answer. Once you have established that the system is being operated properly, you are ready to test the system. Now, to do this, you'll need a test fixture. There are 2 different size test fixtures that can be constructed. The smaller of the 2 is used on 770 through 1175 tractors, and the larger on 1270 through 1570 tractors. The specifications for constructing your particular fixture can be found in the Draft-o-Matic section of the appropriate service manual. For the 770 through 1175, the fixture is found at the back of section 45. And for the 1270 through 1570, look in the back of section 4017. The 17.5-ton Owatonna ram and accessories are available through service tools. You will also have to install a 0 through 3,000 psi pressure gauge in place of the original ton calibrated gauge. The gauge is available through service tools also. All of our testing will be done with this 17.5-ton Owatonna ram. The use of any other ram will require a conversion factor. The conversion factor and example can be found in the 970 through 1070 service manual, section 45, page 24. The first step in checking the Draft-o-Matic system is to lower the hitch arms. Then place the draft sensing lever in the maximum sensing position, which is towards the rear. Then start the engine and pull back on the Draft-o-Matic lever until the hitch arms just begin to raise. At the instant this raising occurs, the Draft-o-Matic lever should be near the mid position between full raise and full lower. Then slowly pull the Draft-o-Matic lever to the rear. The hand lever should be at the full raise position just as the hitch is at full raise. If this is the case, it is an indication that the control linkage is correctly adjusted. If the Draft-o-Matic lever is too far forward, or the hitch arms are at full raise before the control lever is at the rear of its travel, adjust the length of the control cable. On the 770 through 1175, the cable adjustment is made at the cover on top of the rock shaft housing. The adjustment for the 1270 to 1570 is made at the control box under the transmission. The details for making this adjustment will be found in the Draft-o-Matic section of your service manual. The next step is to check the pounds of pull required to operate the Draft-o-Matic system. A general rule of thumb to follow is that it takes approximately 200 pounds of pull greater than draft spring preload to activate the Draft-o-Matic system. Thus, the 770 through 1175, which has a 300 to 500 pound spring preload, will require 500 to 700 pounds pull to activate the Draft-o-Matic. The 1270 through 1570 has a 1,300 to 1,500 pound spring preload, requiring about 1,500 to 1,700 pounds of pull to activate the Draft-o-Matic. To measure the pounds of pull required to operate the Draft-o-Matic, it will be necessary to convert the pounds of pull to pounds per square inch, so it can be read on a hydraulic pressure gauge. Now remember, these conversions are only for the 17.5-ton Owatonna ram. The conversion for the 770 through 1175 is 140 to 200 psi. This means 140 psi on the gauge will equal 500 pounds pull. The 1270 through 1570 converts to 425 through 500 psi. That means 425 psi on the gauge will equal 1,500 pounds pull. In our testing, we're using the 770 through 1175 models, so with the engine running, lower the hitch arms and check that the draft sensing lever is in the maximum sensing position. Then slowly pull the lever back until the hitch just moves upward. Now use the test fixture to pull the sensing shaft to the rear. The Draft-o-Matic should sense somewhere between the 140 to 200 psi reading on the pressure gauge. If the hitch arms rise slightly and stop, use the test fixture to again increase the draft spring tension. The hitch arms should again rise slightly and stop. Increase the pressure. Rise and stop. Increase the pressure. Rise and stop. Now release the pressure. The hitch arms should lower. This is how the Draft-o-Matic system should operate. Now let's see what must be done if the system did not operate correctly. First, if the hitch arms raised below 140 psi, the draft spring's tension is not great enough. On the 770 through 1175 tractors, this adjustment is made with the cams at the front of the springs. There is a cam for each spring. On the 1270 to 1570, the spring tension is adjusted with the center set screw and 3 lock bolts. Second, if more than 200 psi was required to raise the hitch arms, or they did not raise at all, either the draft spring preload is too great or the sensing linkage will require adjustment. We can isolate the draft spring preload problem from the sensing linkage problem by measuring the gap between the sensing cross shaft and the drawbar bracket. With 200 psi applied to the cross shaft, the gap should measure 0.02 to 0.04 of an inch. If the gap measurement does not fall between 0.02 and 0.04, the spring tension must be adjusted. If the gap measures between 0.02 and 0.04, the problem is in the sensing linkage. Details on all these adjustments will be found in your service manual Draft-o-Matic sections. If on an occasional 770 through 1175 tractor you should find that the adjustment cam on the draft spring does not provide enough adjustment range, a new can and washer is available, and due to the hole relocation, provides 1/3 more adjustment. The cam number is A147468. and the washer number is A147637. So remember, if the hitch raises and lowers normally but does not sense, the problem is in either the sensing linkage or the draft spring tension. Now that we've discussed the sensing complaint, please answer this question. When using the test fixture and applying approximately 200 psi over spring preload, the hitch arms should A, raise to the top, B, raise slightly and stop, or C, raise until the load is released. Write down your answer. The next area of customer complaint we will examine is when the hitch arms raise all the way up, but won't cancel. In this situation, the rock shaft piston bottoms out in its stroke before the mechanical linkage can move the valve spool to the hold position. Although the hitch arms are as high as they can go, the valve continues to direct oil to the rock shaft piston. This causes the hydraulic system to constantly run against relief. The result is heated hydraulic fluid and possible damage to hydraulic and transmission parts. The cause of the problem can be either in the mechanical linkage or the Draft-o-Matic valve. We will begin by looking at the easiest part first, the Draft-o-Matic valve. Before the valve cover can be removed to gain access to the internal valve parts, the hitch arms must be lowered, or you will have oil gushing out around the cover as the arms come down. Now examine the trigger poppet valve located in the control valve of all Draft-o-Matic tractors. Foreign material sometimes causes the poppet valve to become stuck in the up position. Remove and clean the poppet valve assembly. Your service manual will cover the reassembly. Then make sure that the piston can travel freely in the valve body. After you have cleaned and reassembled the trigger poppet valve, recheck the hitch arms. If the hitch arms still won't cancel, then a linkage problem exists. On the 770 through 1175, check the valve spool lockout lever. It may be broken or need to be adjusted. On the 1270 through 1570, you must drain the oil from the draft control housing before you remove the cover. A word of caution, it could be hot. About 1 gallon of oil will be retained in the housing. The eccentric pivot nut located inside the linkage box is used to adjust the valve lockout mechanism. Details of these adjustments are covered in your service manual Draft-o-Matic section. Also check the adjustment of the follow-up linkage. The follow-up linkage on the 770 through 1175 is located under the cover on top of the rock shaft housing. On 1270 through 1570, the linkage is located inside the transmission case. Remember, if the hitch arms won't cancel, check the easiest first, the valve. If the trigger poppet is not stuck, check the canceling or follow-up linkage. Now that you have reviewed the canceling problem, please answer this question. If the hitch arms won't cancel, the problem can be in the A, sensing cable adjustment, B, trigger poppet, or C, spring preload adjustment. Write down your answer. The third area of customer complaint is that the hitch arms either jerk or hiccup when the engine is running, or lower by themselves when the engine isn't running. The first thing to do is to determine whether the problem is located in the Draft-o-Matic control valve or in the rock shaft cylinder. To isolate the problem, raise the hitch arms to the full raise position. Make sure that the sensing lever is in the maximum sensing position, which is towards the rear. Now, block up the hitch arms in this full raise position, then turn off the engine. Again, make sure those hitch arms are well blocked, or you could have oil squirting all over when you isolate the control valve in the next step. Be careful. Isolating the Draft-o-Matic control valve will keep oil from returning to the valve from the rock shaft cylinder. Although similar in appearance, the 770 through 1175 model control valves have a different isolation process than the 1270 through 1570 model control valves. On the 770 through 1175 models, the control valve mounting bolts are loosened and steel shim stock is slipped under the valve. This will block the load check ball hole, which in turn will prevent oil flow returning from the rock shaft cylinder. Retighten the valve mounting bolts. The isolation of the control valve on the 1270 through 1570 is accomplished by disconnecting and capping the external line from the cylinder to the valve. And now that we have isolated the valve, the rest of the diagnostic procedure will be the same for all tractors. First, remove the blocks from under the hitch arms and observe. If the hitch arms remain raised, the problem is located in the control valve. If the hitch arms lower, the problem is in the rock shaft cylinder. So let's start by examining the rock shaft cylinder and piston for scoring and fractures. Replace any damaged parts, as well as the piston wear rings and seals. Once again, consult the Draft-o-Matic section of the appropriate service manual for details. If the problem was traced to the control valve, first, replace the blocking under the hitch arms. Then either reconnect the line to the rock shaft cylinders or remove the shim stock from behind the valve. Next, check the control spool movement as outlined in your service manual. The chart found in your 1270 through 1370 service manual will be helpful in making this adjustment. While adjusting the control spool movement, inspect the lowering piston seat for chipping. If the seat is damaged, the Draft-o-Matic valve will have to be replaced. Next, examine the load check ball and seat for chipping and cracking. To replace the seat, it will be first necessary to tap the damaged seat for a removal. If internal damage is the case, the control valve body must be replaced. No amount of tests or adjustments can rectify a faulty valve body. Now, reinstall the ball for the lowering piston into the valve body. Then the lowering piston, and then the spring. Now, install the load check ball and spring, and be sure to replace all O-rings in the valve body. If all previous adjustments and replacements are performed according to the service manual and there is no evidence of internal valve damage, the original problem of lowering or hiccuping hitch arms will be eliminated. Now that we have completed our discussion on the leak down hiccup complaint, please answer this question. If the hitch arms leak down, the problem can be A, spool lockout lever, B, damaged relief valve, or C, chipped lowering piston seat. Write down your answer. Another area of complaint could be that the hitch arms won't raise at all. Begin your diagnosis by determining whether the problem is in the main hydraulic system or in the Draft-o-Matic valve. Check the remote valve operation to see if they operate normally. If the remote valves do not operate in the normal manner, you'll have to use a flow meter and check the entire hydraulic system as outlined in your service manual. If the remote valves are operating in the normal manner, the problem then is in the Draft-o-Matic system. So the first area to examine is the control cables. Make sure that they are connected and adjusted properly. Now, if the hitch arm still won't raise after the cable adjustment, remove the trigger poppet valve assembly from the Draft-o-Matic control valve. Take this assembly apart and thoroughly clean each component. After thoroughly cleaning the valve assembly, reassemble the trigger poppet. Seat the needle valve and then back out 2 turns. Install the locking screw, making sure that the needle valve does not turn while turning in the locking screw. The dome side of the plug goes out. Then install the spring and spring retainer. Next, remove and inspect the lowering piston assembly. Make sure the lowering piston is clean and will work freely in the valve body. Your service manual Draft-o-Matic section will provide the details of the reassembly and adjustment of the Draft-o-Matic valve. If the hitch arms won't raise after the cable and valve adjustments, inspect the rock shaft piston and cylinder assembly. As a quick review, if the hitch arms won't raise, first determine if the remotes work. If they do, the problem lies in the Draft-o-Matic system. If they don't, the complete hydraulic system will have to be flow tested to isolate pump or valve problems. This completes our discussion on the won't raise complaint. So please answer this question. When the hitch arms won't raise, you should check A, sensing cable adjustment, B, trigger poppet adjustment, or C, spring preload adjustment. Write down your answer. The fifth and last area of customer complaint that we'll discuss is the hitch arms won't lower. Let's begin our diagnosis by examining the control cables. Make sure all of the cables are connected and adjusted correctly. Once the cables are adjusted, observe the control spool. The spool must be pulled into the valve body when the Draft-o-Matic lever is moved to the lowering position. If it is not, it is an indication that the control linkage is broken or disconnected. If the arm still will not lower, the problem is either in the rock shaft or the Draft-o-Matic valve. To isolate the problem, block up the hitch arms. And remember, block them securely because we're going to remove the valve cover. Be careful. Now, remove the spring from the lowering piston. And then remove the lowering piston assembly and the ball. Put the cover back on the valve without the lowering piston in the valve. Then remove the blocking from the hitch arms. If the arms still will not lower, the problem is in the rock shaft assembly, probably a scored or stuck piston. If the arms did lower, the problem is in the Draft-o-Matic valve lowering piston. The procedure for checking the lowering piston is the same as we did for the hiccups. This means cleaning and adjusting the screw as described in your service manual Draft-o-Matic section. Now remember, when the hitch arms won't lower, check the control cable and linkage. If the problem is not corrected, remove the lowering piston to isolate the Draft-o-Matic valve from the rock shaft cylinder. Now that you have reviewed the won't lower problem, please answer this question. If the hitch arms don't lower, the first step is to block up the arms and A, remove the lowering piston, B, isolate the DOM valve and rock shaft, or C, check the control cables and spool movement. Write down your answer. For each of the 5 preceding customer complaint situations, the case service manual contains valuable information on all of the various inspections and adjustments. When used in conjunction with this diagnostic system, any Draft-o-Matic problem can be accurately isolated and confidently solved.